By 1959, Detroit had stopped whispering and started shouting. The recession that had gutted new car sales in 1958 was finally loosening its grip, and every manufacturer in America came back swinging. Tailfins reached their tallest point in automotive history. Engines grew bigger almost across the board. And underneath all that chrome, several of the engines and ideas that would define the muscle car era of the 1960s were quietly rolling off assembly lines for the very first time, years before anyone had ever heard the words muscle car. By the end of this countdown, you'll know exactly which 10 American cars earned the right to be called the fastest of 1959, and why so many of them turned out to be the direct ancestors of legends still famous today. This isn't just a list of thin-covered land yachts. This is the story of the year several of Detroit's most important performance engines were born. The Chrysler 383, the Buick 401 Wildcat, the Pontiac 389. Engines that would go on to power some of the greatest muscle cars of the following decade. Nobody in 1959 called any of this a muscle car. That word didn't exist yet, but the pieces were already on the table. By 1959, the recession was easing, and Detroit celebrated by going bigger in almost every direction. Tailfins reached heights that would never be matched again. Cadillac's fins that year stood taller than anything the company had built before, or would build after. General Motors' full-size cars grew wider and lower across the board. Chrysler Corporation redesigned its forward look lineup with even more dramatic styling than the year before. Underneath the sheet metal, the engineering was just as ambitious. Chrysler retired the legendary Hemi from its letter series 300 and replaced it with an all-new, lighter, cheaper-to-build wedge engine. Dodge introduced its 383 cubic inch V8 for the first time, an engine that would go on to power Roadrunners, Super Bs, and Chargers for the next decade. Buick launched a brand new 401 cubic inch V8 called the Wildcat, a name that would eventually become its own model. Pontiac's all-new 389 cubic inch V8 debuted under the Bonneville, an engine that would find its way into a mid-size coupe 5 years later and change the entire industry. NASCAR ran its first-ever Daytona 500 in February of 1959, and Detroit's manufacturers paid very close attention to who won. Let's start the countdown. Number 10 introduces an engine name that would echo through Buick's lineup for the next decade, the Wildcat. For 1959, Buick replaced its Roadmaster with an all-new flagship called the Electra, and the longer, more luxurious Electra 225, nicknamed the Deuce and a Quarter for its 225-inch overall length. Under the hood of every Electra sat a brand new 401 cubic inch V8, factory rated at 325 horsepower with a single 4-barrel carburetor, backed by Buick's twin-turbine Dynaflow automatic. Here's the detail worth remembering. Buick called this new engine the Wildcat from the very start, referencing its 445 pound-feet of torque. The name was originally just an engine badge in 1959. It wouldn't become its own standalone model until 1963. But the 401 Wildcat V8 introduced here would go on to power some of Buick's quickest cars of the entire 1960s, eventually growing into the 425 cubic inch version used in the legendary dual-quad Super Wildcat. Buick built 66,493 Electras for 1959 alone, proof that a genuinely powerful new engine wrapped in enough chrome and luxury trim could still move serious volume even coming out of a recession year. Number 9 is one of the strangest engineering achievements of the entire decade, the 1959 Ford Galaxie Skyliner and its extraordinary retractable hardtop roof. At the push of a button, an intricate system of electric motors, relays, and linkages would fold the Skyliner's solid steel roof backward and lower it into the trunk, transforming a hardtop into a true convertible in about a minute. It remains one of only a small handful of production retractable hardtops ever built in automotive history. Under the hood sat Ford's 352 cubic inch Thunderbird Special V8, factory rated at 300 horsepower at 4,600 RPM, with 380 pound-feet of torque. Genuinely strong power for a full-size Ford in 1959. Part of the same FE engine family that debuted the year before in the Thunderbird. Just 12,915 Skyliners were built for the 1959 model year, and this would be the very last year Ford offered the retractable hardtop at all. The mechanism was brilliant, but it was also complex, heavy, and expensive to build and maintain, cutting deep into the trunk space and the car's overall reliability. It's a perfect example of Detroit's late 1950s ambition running slightly ahead of what the market or the technology could fully support. Number 8 introduces a name that would carry Plymouth's performance image for the next 2 decades, the Sport Fury. For 1959, Plymouth restructured its lineup, and the Sport Fury became the new top-of-the-line performance model, available as a 2-door hardtop or convertible. Standard power came from a 260 horsepower, 318 cubic inch V8, but the engine that mattered was the optional Golden Commando 395, a bored-out 361 cubic inch version of Chrysler's B-Series V8, factory rated at 305 horsepower and 395 pound-feet of torque, backed by a single Carter 4-barrel carburetor. Unlike the year before, Plymouth had abandoned its brief, troubled flirtation with electronic fuel injection entirely. A smart move given how that story had played out across Chrysler Corporation in 1958. Car Life magazine tested a Golden Commando-equipped Sport Fury in 1959 and clocked it from 0 to 60 in just 7.8 seconds. Genuinely quick numbers for a full-size American car of that era. Just 17,867 Sport Fury hardtops and 5,990 convertibles were built for the year. It was Plymouth's statement that even the value-price brand in Chrysler's lineup could build something with real teeth, a formula the Sport Fury name would carry forward all the way into the muscle car era of the 1970s. Number 7 belongs to an engine that would go on to become one of the most beloved V8s in Mopar history, the very first Dodge 383. The Custom Royal was Dodge's flagship for 1959, wrapped in some of the most outlandish two-tone fin styling of the entire decade. Under the hood, buyers could order the new D500 package, a 383 cubic inch V8 available with a single 4-barrel carburetor at 320 horsepower, or, for buyers who wanted the real thing, the Super D500, fitted with dual 4-barrel Carter carburetors and factory rated at 345 horsepower. This was the very first year for the 383 in any Dodge, an engine that would go on to serve Chrysler Corporation for more than a decade, eventually powering everything from family sedans to Roadrunners, Super Bs, and RT Chargers throughout the muscle car era. Nobody buying a Custom Royal in 1959 could have known they were driving around with the ancestor of some of the next decade's most famous engines under the hood. Number 6 introduces Oldsmobile's biggest rocket V8 yet and connects to one of the most famous moments in American racing history. For 1959, Oldsmobile replaced its 371 cubic inch V8 with an all-new 394 cubic inch rocket engine, factory rated at 315 horsepower and a massive 435 pound-feet of torque, with a single 4-barrel carburetor. It was, at the time, the largest V8 Oldsmobile had ever built. Here's the detail that makes this car worth remembering. A 1959 Oldsmobile 98 two-door hardtop, powered by this very engine, was driven by a young driver named Richard Petty to victory at the first-ever Daytona 500, held on the brand-new Daytona International Speedway in February of 1959. It was one of the earliest major victories of what would become the most storied career in NASCAR history, and it happened behind the wheel of a full-size Oldsmobile luxury car, not a stripped-down racer. The 394 Rocket would go on to power Oldsmobiles for years afterward, eventually growing into the high-compression Skyrocket and Starfire versions of the following decade. Number 4 brings us back to Chevrolet's 348 Big Block, now more powerful than ever in a car that had just become its own series. For 1959, the Impala was separated from the Bel Air entirely and became Chevrolet's own standalone model line: sedan, hardtop, coupe, and convertible. And roughly 473,000 were built for the year, an enormous number for any single nameplate. Buyers could still order the 348 cubic inch big block in multiple states of tune, from a 250 horsepower base 4-barrel up through the Tri-Power Super Turbo Thrust Special. Late in the model year, Chevrolet quietly bumped the compression on that top engine and pushed output to a genuine 335 horsepower, the highest rating the 348 would ever officially wear. This was also the year Chevrolet introduced the El Camino, its car-based pickup, built on the same platform and sharing the same 348 engine family. Between the Impala's soaring sales numbers and the 348's growing horsepower figures, 1959 marked the moment Chevrolet fully committed to big block performance as part of its everyday lineup, not just a special option. Not every ambitious idea from 1959 survived. You already heard about the Ford Skyliner's extraordinary retractable steel roof, and it's worth pausing on just how far Detroit was willing to push mechanical complexity to win a customer's attention that year. The Skyliner's roof system used a network of relays, limit switches, and no fewer than 10 separate electric motors, all coordinated to fold a solid steel roof backward into the trunk without pinching a single wire or misaligning a single latch. When it worked, it was one of the most impressive party tricks in the entire industry. When it didn't, it could leave an owner with a roof stuck halfway open, sitting in a dealership service bay for days. Ford discontinued the retractable hardtop after 1959, and no American manufacturer would attempt anything similar again for decades. It's a reminder that not every brilliant engineering idea from Detroit's golden age was built to last. Some were simply built to amaze for one glorious model year, before quietly disappearing. Number 3 is another orphaned Chrysler brand quietly building one of the fastest cars of the year, the 1959 DeSoto Adventurer. DeSoto's performance flagship for 1959 dropped its old 361 in favor of the same all-new 383 cubic inch wedge V8 that Dodge and Chrysler were both rolling out that year, factory rated at 350 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque, fed by dual Carter 4-barrel carburetors with a high-lift camshaft and larger cylinder head ports. On paper, it outpunched Dodge's own Super D500 and came within 30 horsepower of the flagship Chrysler 300e at a noticeably lower price. Just 590 Adventurer hardtops and a mere 97 convertibles were built for the entire model year, making the 1959 Adventurer one of the rarest genuine performance cars in America that season. DeSoto sales were in a free fall by 1959, with rumors already circulating that Chrysler intended to phase the brand out entirely. Rumors that proved true within 2 more years. But for one final, overlooked season, DeSoto quietly built a 350 horsepower flagship that could hang with almost anything else in Detroit. Number 2 takes us back to Pontiac and to the single most important new engine of the entire model year, the all-new 389 cubic inch V8. The 1959 Bonneville became its own full series for the first time, and it was named Motor Trend's Car of the Year. It also debuted Pontiac's wide-track chassis design and split grille styling, both of which would remain Pontiac signatures for decades. Power came from the brand new 389 cubic inch, offered in 3 states of tune, a base 4-barrel at 255 horsepower, a tri-power version making roughly 300 horsepower, and the Rochester mechanical fuel injection option rated at 310 horsepower, though period road tests found the far cheaper tri-power setup just as quick in the real world. Here's why this car matters more than any horsepower can explain. This exact 389 cubic inch engine block, developed and introduced right here in the 1959 Bonneville, would go on to power a mid-size Pontiac coupe just 5 years later, a car called the GTO, widely credited as the machine that started the entire muscle car era. Every GTO built between 1964 and 1966 used a direct descendant of the engine you just heard about. And that brings us to number 1, the fastest American production car of 1959, the Chrysler 300E. After 4 straight years of the legendary Hemi, Chrysler retired it for 1959 and replaced it with an all-new 413 cubic inch wedge-head V8, marketed as the Golden Lion. Fitted with dual 4-barrel Carter carburetors, the 300E was factory rated at 380 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque, numbers that remarkably matched or exceeded the outgoing Hemi at a fraction of the weight and manufacturing cost. A small handful of even more powerful examples, reportedly built with higher output MR engine codes, were rated as high as 390 horsepower. Just 550 coupes and 140 convertibles were built for the entire model year, some of the lowest production numbers of any Chrysler letter car up to that point, a direct consequence of a price tag over $5,300, a genuinely enormous sum for 1959. Today, only a small fraction of those cars are believed to survive. The 300E was the last Chrysler letter car built on true body-on-frame construction and the first to prove that a wedge-head engine could match a Hemi's performance without the Hemi's cost and complexity, a lesson Chrysler's engineers would carry forward for the next decade of B and RB engine development. Fast, rare, and quietly historic, the 1959 Chrysler 300E earned a top spot on this list. So what did all of this actually prove? That Detroit, even fresh out of a recession, was willing to bet on bigger engines and bolder styling rather than play it safe. That several of the engines born in 1959, the Dodge 383, the Pontiac 389, the Buick 401 Wildcat, weren't one-year wonders, but the literal architecture the muscle car era would be built from just a few years later. And that not every ambitious idea from Detroit's golden age was meant to last. Some, like the Skyliner's retractable roof, existed simply to prove it could be done. The words muscle car were still 5 years away from meaning anything to anyone, but by the end of 1959, almost every engine that would eventually carry that name was already sitting on a showroom floor somewhere in America, quietly waiting for its moment. The muscle car era did not appear out of nowhere in 1964. It was built slowly, one big V8 at a time, and 1959 quietly handed the next decade some of its most important building blocks, wrapped in tailfins nobody would ever build quite that tall again. Which 1959 American car would you bring back if you could only choose one? The Hemi replacing Chrysler 300E, the GTO ancestor Pontiac Bonneville, or one of the forgotten machines further down this list? Did your father, your uncle, or a neighbor on your street own one of these cars? Write the name in the comments below.